Hello everyone, I'm SnakeEyes. Welcome back to the history of space simulators. In this episode, we will discover the golden age titles up to the 21st century. We will explore how studios across the world embraced the genre, creating an incredible variety of games that shaped the decade. We'll revisit lesser known but fascinating titles such as Absolute Zero and Darklight Conflict, as well as groundbreaking series like iWar and Colony Wars. From the ambitious vision of Frontier Elite 2 to the high-speed action of Terminal Velocity and Descent, the journey will also take us to the unforgettable battles of Freespace and Freespace 2, games that many still consider the pinnacle of the genre. I haven't forgotten Star Wars, the legendary X-Wing and TIE Fighter series, along with Rogue Squadron and other iconic titles. These deserve their own dedicated episode, where we'll dive into the galaxy far, far away. For now, get ready to explore the incredible variety of space sims that defined the 1990s. It was the golden age of space sims. After the overwhelming success of Origin Systems and their Wing Commander saga, other studios began to release new titles that expanded the growing PC space sim market. One of the first was Epic, developed by Ocean. Initially released for Amiga and Atari ST, Epic was later ported to PC-DOS, where critics praised its playability despite its limitations and modest production values. Although it didn't achieve major commercial impact, it planted the seed for ideas and techniques that would influence later titles. Epic was heavily inspired by the TV series Battlestar Galactica and made extensive use of vector and 3D graphics, even for its low-budget cutscenes. The gameplay leaned more toward the arcade style, drawing technical elements from Ocean's earlier flight simulator F-29 Retaliator. In 1992, Microprose released Mantis XF 5700 Experimental Fighter, their first real attempt at a space combat simulator. Better known for their strategy and flight sims, Microprose tried to bring the feel of atmospheric jet combat into space. The result was a game that looked and played more like a futuristic flight simulator than a pure space sim. Although it never achieved the popularity of Wing Commander or Elite 2, Mantis was remembered for its ambitious design, its branching campaign, and its solid technical execution for the time. The following year, in 1993, the long-awaited messiah of space sims finally arrived, Frontier Elite 2. David Braben partnered with GameTech to bring his self-written code to a proper commercial release. The game featured vast improvements over its predecessor, larger scale, richly detailed galaxies, and realistic Newtonian physics in its flight model. For many fans, these features turned it into a cult classic, even if sales never matched expectations. Despite being praised as a technical marvel and a critical success, Elite 2 struggled commercially. The game was overshadowed by faster-paced action titles that appealed to a broader audience, while Braben's ambitious and more realistic simulation appealed to a niche group of players. Still, Elite 2 sold over 350,000 copies, earning Braben significant royalties and cementing his presence in the industry. He would remain active for decades, eventually shaping the genre again in later years, something we'll revisit when we reach the modern era. In 1994, GameTech published Star Crusader, developed by Take-Two Interactive as their answer to the dominance of Wing Commander and TIE Fighter franchises. Graphically, Star Crusader was really modest compared to its competitors, but it impressed with its depth of dialogue, strong world building, and the sheer variety of missions available. While it never reached the same commercial success as its rivals, it earned respect among fans and critics as an ambitious and thoughtful entry into the genre. Also in 1994, Ocean Software released Inferno, the spiritual successor to Epic. Like its predecessor, it offered large-scale space battles inspired by TV space operas, but this time with more polished graphics, smoother controls, and an even greater sense of scale. Inferno blended arcade-style combat with strategic elements, letting players fight massive fleet engagements while managing resources and objectives. Although it didn't break into the mainstream, it was appreciated by fans of Epic as a bigger and bolder attempt to push Ocean further into the space sim market. Finally, and also in 1994, Parallax Software released Descent, a revolutionary title that blended the mechanics of space combat with the intensity of first-person shooters. It wasn't a pure space simulator, but it offered something new, 6 Degrees of Freedom, also known as 6DOF. This allowed for full movement in every direction and gave players a sense of immersion and freedom of control, unlike anything that had come before it. Distributed by Interplay, Descent quickly became a landmark of the era, thanks in part to its shareware distribution model. Its mix of fast-paced combat, maze-like environments, and competitive multiplayer placed it alongside early classics like Doom and Quake, helping define the rise of competitive 3D action. Parallax expanded the series with Descent 2 in 1997 and Descent 3 in 1999, keeping the formula alive through the end of the decade. However, decades later, its influence would resurface through a new game called Descent Underground, a spiritual successor developed by Descendant Studios, a team formed by Eric Wingman Peterson after leaving the Star Citizen project. In 2015, Descent Underground was crowdfunded as a modern reboot of the classic 6 Degree of Freedom shooter, but the project soon ran into legal and licensing problems. A dispute between developer Descendant Studios and publisher Little Orbit escalated into lawsuits, and the license to use the Descent name expired. In 2022, Little Orbit took full control of the project, rebranding it as Ships That Fight Underground. Today, the game remains unreleased, but development is continuing under its new identity. 1994 was on a streak, and Electronic Arts also released their high-budgeted Shockwave Assault, a futuristic 3D planetary combat game for the 3DO console. Although not strictly a space sim, it was notable for its use of early 3D graphics. It had a PC port, which was one of the first to fully utilize Direct 3D on Windows 95. High production values were palpable through its cutscenes, but its high production costs made it struggle in a very competitive market. It still earned a small sequel on the 3DO console. Amidst the battle of freeware, shareware, and fancy demos in 1995, 3D Realms launched Terminal Velocity. Like Descent, it leaned heavily toward arcade action, but stood out for its large, open environments and fast-paced combat. Its popularity was fueled by shareware distribution, where players received a full, playable portion of the game for free. This model, common in the mid-90s, helped Terminal Velocity reach a wide audience and inspire many later titles. Following 1995, Domark published Absolute Zero, a lesser-known but fascinating space sim that blended orbital and surface combat. Set on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, it featured a well-constructed story despite its modest graphics and limited resources. It never reached the fame of larger franchises, but critics praised its inventive campaign and depth, and today it's remembered as a bold experiment in a crowded genre. And to bring 1995 to a close, Interactive Magic released Star Rangers, another experiment in merging space combat with elements of strategy. This was yet another title falling short of mainstream success, but it managed to demonstrate how developers could continue to push technical boundaries and produce well-executed and entertaining space sims during the mid-90s. By 1997, the golden age of space sims was in full swing, and several remarkable titles emerged almost simultaneously. Electronic Arts published Darklight Conflict, developed by Rage Software. Released on PC and later ported to the Sega Saturn and Sony's first PlayStation, it offered sleek visuals and a cinematic presentation that stood out at the time. While it didn't achieve the commercial power of the biggest franchises, it was remembered as a solid space combat experience that pushed EA further into the genre. That same year, the UK-based studio Particle Systems released iWar, also known as Independence War, published by Infogrames. Unlike the fast-paced action of Wing Commander or X-Wing, iWar aimed for a more complex and realistic approach. Its flight simulation mechanics, closer to the simulation style of Elite 2, were combined with a strong story and deep combat system. This combination struck a balance that appealed to fans looking for a richer and more demanding experience compared to the competition. iWar stood out as one of the most ambitious PC space sims of the time, and its success would later lead to the development of Independence War 2, released a few years later. Meanwhile, Psygnosis, the British studio also famous for Lemmings and Wipeout, launched Colony Wars in 1997. Originally published on PlayStation, it featured impressive aesthetics, fluid controls, and a strong campaign that attracted both fans and critics. Some reviews criticized its gameplay depth compared to PC-based sims, but the game's cinematic flair and success on consoles led to 2 sequels, giving Colony Wars the rare distinction of being one of the very few space sim series to thrive in the console market. 1997 then was a turning point, a year that showcased how the genre could branch out in different directions, from accessible cinematic experiences to complex simulations and even into the world of console exclusives. As the decade neared its end, two of the genre's most beloved titles emerged as games that, for many, represented the peak of space combat simulators. In 1998, Volition, in collaboration with Interplay, released Freespace: The Great War. Unlike some of its flashier contemporaries, Freespace didn't rely on a huge budget. Instead, it delivered thrilling battles, massive capital ships, and an engaging storyline that captivated players. Its dynamic missions, solid enemy AI, and cinematic presentation earned it praise from critics and fans alike. The following year, Volition released its masterpiece, Freespace 2. It expanded everything that made the first game so memorable. The story was darker, more complex, and deeply immersive, while the battles reached new heights in scale and spectacle. The graphics pushed the hardware of the time to its limits, and the game's design struck a balance between accessibility and depth. Many players considered Freespace 2 the finest space sim ever made, yet ironically, it struggled commercially. The market for PC space sims was already oversaturated, and shifting trends in the gaming industry left little room for the genre to grow. Despite this, Freespace 2 achieved cult status, remembered as one of the defining space sims of all time. Its influence lasted long beyond its release, inspiring fan projects, mods, and even open-source community efforts to keep the game alive for future generations. For many fans, Freespace 2 was bittersweet, a brilliant high point that also symbolized the beginning of the end for the golden age of space simulators. Before we end, another important franchise took its first steps in 1999, X: Beyond the Frontier, which was developed by the German studio Egosoft. Unlike the straightforward combat focus of Freespace or Wing Commander, X set out to offer something broader, inspired by Elite, Privateer, and other classics. X: Beyond the Frontier expanded on those ideas with a living, dynamic economy. Whether acting as a merchant, a pirate, or an explorer, players were free to carve their own path. Graphically, the game was solid for its time, with vast space environments that conveyed a real sense of scale. Its only major shortcoming was a weaker combat system compared to other titles of the era. The release of X marked the beginning of a saga, with sequels like X2, X3, and eventually X4, Foundations. We've reached the end of this episode. Join me in the next one soon, where we'll go full-on Star Wars, exploring how the X-Wing series was vital to the genre's development. We'll finally set up to go further, to understand why, despite the brilliance, space sims began to fade from the spotlight in the decade of the 2000s. Until then, I'll see you out there.